So now we should talk a little bit about frameworks. And I'm going to use the actor framework in DQMH. But this most likely applies to any framework you use. If you use workers, if you use decaf, if you use any of these other frameworks. JKI state machine objects, messenger library, whatever it happens to be. So these are just my general rules for frameworks. One, most of the frameworks in LabVIEW are messaging frameworks. And they're great for messages, for having parallel processes and sending messages between them. You should use them for that. But you don't need to use them everywhere. Not everything needs to be a parallel process. Not everything needs to be an actor or DQMH module. It's okay to just have straight classes or even just straight VIs or libraries in your code that are not actors or DQMH modules. If they don't need that parallel processing power on their own, that's fine. And part of what doing that allows you to do is to separate the business logic from the messaging. So as an example, if I have a logger and I want to write data to a log file in a very specific format, I can write a class that is a logger and I can test it serially. I can say open the logger, pass it some data, test that the data shows up in the log file, all's good. Then I can take that same logger class and I can create a logger actor that uses my logger class or logging class. I can create a DQMH module that also reuses that same logging or logger class or whatever I call it. And then the logic that does the actual writing to the file and the formatting of all the data is separate from the logic that does the messaging. And that makes it really easy to test the logic that writes the file and formats the data. And the other thing, too, that you want to do is separate the side effects and the actions that you're taking, the manipulating hardware, the talking over the network, as much as you can from the messaging and the business logic, using the same idea of wrapping that in its own separate class that does not necessarily part of the messaging library. And the key is make the framework depend on your code. So your DQMH module depends on your business logic, depends on my logging DQMH module depends on my logging code that is its own reusable chunk of code, and not the other way around. Don't write a logger that depends on DQMH. And basically, if I had to sum it up, if you're familiar with the idea of composition from object-oriented programming, we want to use composition as much as possible. And personally, as a consultant, I find this really useful. For example, I work with lots of clients. Some of them use actor framework, some use DQMH, some use other things. If I every time I do a project, if I write code that depends on whatever framework the client's using, if I have to write a logger and my client's using DQMH and I write a DQMH module that is the logger and all the logging stuff is tied up in the DQMH module, then I go work on a project for somebody who uses actor framework, I can't drag that module over there because it drags DQMH with it, and I don't want that. But if I have a separate logging class or logger class that does the logging, and then I have a DQMH module that wraps it, hey, I can take that core class without the DQMH module and drag that over and drop that into an actor framework project, and it works just fine.